Number 10. Reading the sky before satellites, before radar, before any instrument ever pointed at a cloud, humans survived by watching the sky with terrifying precision. Ancient sailors in the Pacific memorized star positions the way modern people memorize phone numbers. The Polynesian navigators of the Marshall Islands created stick charts, physical maps made from bent sticks and shells that captured not the shape of land, but the pattern of ocean swells, the way water bends around an island, the direction the waves push back. They read the sea through the hull of the boat, lying flat on the deck, feeling the ocean move beneath them. On land, indigenous peoples across Africa, Australia, and the Americas tracked weather through animal behavior, cloud formation, and wind direction with an accuracy that took Western meteorology centuries to match. Red sky at morning. The proverb itself is 4,000 years old, and it works. What makes this technique unsettling is not that it was primitive. It is that it was precise. These were not guesses. These were systems built over thousands of years of trial, error, and death. The people who got it wrong did not survive to teach their children. The sky was not decoration. It was a survival manual written in light. Dundrunnen.Doret. Number 9. Fire without flame. Striking flint against iron pyrite. Spinning a dry wooden spindle against a fireboard until friction produces an ember. Carrying live coals in fungus, specifically bracket fungus, wrapped in leaves for days across hundreds of miles of cold terrain. Fire was not just warmth. It was the single most important tool in human survival for at least 400,000 years, possibly longer. But making fire was not always possible, so ancient humans did something more impressive. They kept it alive. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and North Africa shows that fire was transported deliberately across long distances. The slow match, a smouldering piece of plant material that could survive wind and light rain, was a technology used by humans long before written language. In Australia, Aboriginal communities carried fire sticks on long journeys, maintaining coals for days. In the Arctic, the Inuit developed methods for generating fire from damp materials in conditions where modern survival gear would fail. What makes this remarkable is not the drama. It is the patience. Ancient humans understood that fire, once lost, might take hours to rebuild, and in some environments, those hours could kill. So they treated fire the way we treat electricity, as something too important to ever let go dark. The ember was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. Tukes. Number 8. Water from nothing. In the Negev desert, archaeologists have found an ancient system of stone walls and channels, some dating back 4,000 years, designed to collect rainwater that falls only a few days per year. Not rivers, not springs, rain that barely falls, channeled, collected, stored. Enough to grow crops in one of the driest places on Earth. The Nabateans, the people who built Petra, survived in the desert not by finding water, but by engineering it into existence. They carved cisterns into rock, built fog catchers, and lined channels with plaster to prevent absorption. Their water management systems were so effective that modern researchers have replicated them to address contemporary water scarcity. In coastal deserts, ancient peoples harvested dew. Grass mats, animal skins, and stone surfaces were used to collect moisture from morning air. In the Andes, the Inca built fog-catching structures on hillsides. Fog became water. Nothing became something. What makes this terrifying is what it says about necessity. These systems were not invented by engineers with time to spare. They were invented by people who would die without water in 72 hours, who lived in places where water almost did not exist. They did not wait for rain. They built systems to catch what little the sky offered and refused to let a single drop disappear. Numtres number 7. Eating the inedible. Survival food is not food you choose. It is food that keeps you alive when everything else is gone. Across the ancient world, humans developed techniques to extract nutrition from sources that appear at first glance to be worthless or even toxic. Acorns, which contain bitter tannins that cause stomach damage when eaten raw, were leached in running water for days by Native American communities to produce a safe, calorie-dense flour. The process takes patience. But the alternative was starvation. In Scandinavia, lutefisk, fish preserved in lye, was a survival method developed in environments where fresh food was unavailable for months at a time. Across the Arctic, fermentation preserved meat in ways that prevented death from vitamin deficiency. The Inuit ate fermented walrus, buried for months, not because it tasted good, but because the fermentation process produced nutrients that raw or cooked meat alone could not provide. Bark bread. Bone broth made from boiled gravel to extract trace minerals. Clay eaten during pregnancy across multiple ancient cultures, now understood to bind toxins in the gut. What makes this disturbing is the sophistication. These techniques required understanding, real, tested, generational understanding of chemistry, biology, and nutrition. Without ever knowing those words existed, they could not afford to be wrong. One mistake, number 6, shelter in 48 hours. An exposed human in cold, wet conditions can lose consciousness within hours and die within a day. The body loses heat 25 times faster in water than in air. Wind accelerates that loss further. Ancient humans built shelter not because they wanted comfort, but because without it, they had less than 2 days. The debris hut, branches layered with leaves, bark, and forest material, can raise the internal temperature by 30 degrees or more compared to open air. It was used across Europe, Asia, and North America for thousands of years. No tools required, no fire required, just understanding of insulation. Arctic peoples built snow houses, the igloo, that maintained internal temperatures near freezing even when outside temperatures dropped to -40. The dome shape distributes weight. The entrance tunnel is lower than the sleeping platform, trapping rising warm air inside. The physics are exact. The engineering is refined over thousands of years of freezing winters. In the tropics, ancient communities elevated shelters on platforms to escape ground moisture, insects, and flooding. Roof pitch was calculated, not with instruments, but with experience, to shed rain before it soaked through. What makes this remarkable is the speed. In a survival situation, this knowledge had to be immediate. You did not have time to experiment. The people who survived had already learned, and the ones who were still learning were already gone. Don't run. Number 5. Tracking without instruments. A single footprint can tell an experienced tracker the weight of an animal, the direction it was traveling, how recently it passed, whether it was injured, and whether it was aware it was being followed. This is not magic. It is science built from thousands of hours of observation. Indigenous trackers across southern Africa, the San people of the Kalahari, practiced persistence hunting, running prey over distances of up to 35 kilometers in midday heat until the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion. Humans are one of the few mammals capable of sustained long-distance running. The San used this advantage with a level of skill that researchers studying the technique in the 20th century described as almost impossible to believe without witnessing it. They read broken grass stems, disturbed soil, crushed insects, and the direction of dew displacement on leaves. They tracked animals across rocky ground where no visible print was left. following micro-evidence invisible to untrained eyes. What makes this unsettling is that this knowledge is nearly gone. The trackers who carried it passed down across 0 generations of direct experience are among the last people on Earth who can perform it. Written language preserved philosophy, law, and literature. It did not preserve this. The knowledge that kept humanity alive the longest is the knowledge we have lost the fastest. Duntrenum. Number 4. Treating wounds with the forest. Before antibiotics, before surgery, before germ theory, infection killed more people than weapons. A cut that got dirty could end a life in days. And ancient humans knew this. Even without understanding why, honey was used as a wound dressing in ancient Egypt, documented in the Ebers Papyrus, dated to around 1550 BCE. It was not superstition. Honey is naturally antimicrobial. It produces hydrogen peroxide, maintains an acidic pH, and draws moisture from bacterial cells. Modern medicine uses medical-grade honey in wound treatment today. Moldy bread was applied to infected wounds in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Serbia. The mold, in some cases a precursor to penicillin, inhibited bacterial growth. Alexander Fleming did not discover penicillin from nothing. He found it again in a laboratory centuries after field healers had already noticed the pattern. Willow bark, containing salicin, the compound from which aspirin is derived, was used to reduce fever and pain across ancient cultures on multiple continents with no contact between them. What makes this striking is the independent discovery. Ancient healers in China, Egypt, the Americas, and Europe arrived at the same solutions with no communication between them. The forest worked. The knowledge was found, lost, and found again. And the second finding required a laboratory. Nature had already written the pharmacopoeia. Ancient humans read it first. Nuns number 3. Preserving food across seasons. A civilization that cannot store food cannot survive winter. Every ancient culture on Earth that survived more than a few generations developed a method of food preservation, and the methods they chose reveal exactly how desperate the need was. Salt, smoke, fermentation, drying, freezing, fat sealing. Each one is a method of killing or slowing bacteria without knowing bacteria existed. The Romans salted fish and meat on an industrial scale. The word salary derives from salt, reflecting how valuable it was. Norse Vikings smoked and dried fish in ways that allowed it to survive months at sea without refrigeration. Peruvian communities freeze-dried potatoes at altitude, exposing them to freezing night temperatures, then pressing out the moisture, producing chuño, a food that can last years without spoiling. In Korea, kimchi fermentation was not invented for taste. It was invented because winter killed gardens and populations needed vegetables to survive. The lactic acid fermentation process preserved the food and created probiotics that maintained gut health when fresh nutrients were unavailable. What makes this frightening is how dependent we still are on these discoveries. Refrigeration is 150 years old. The preservation techniques that kept human populations alive for the previous 10,000 years were invented under conditions of extreme necessity, and some of them are still irreplaceable. Remove the electricity. The ancient knowledge is still the only thing that works. Dua to Tuntrus number 2. Navigating without maps. The Polynesian navigators who crossed the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on Earth, did so without compass, without sextant, and without any written chart. They read ocean swells, star positions, cloud formations, bird flight patterns, phosphorescent wake patterns, and the color of the water beneath them. Their mental maps, called wayfinding, stored not static images but dynamic, living models of the ocean. They memorized the rising and setting positions of over 200 stars. They knew which birds flew only within 100 miles of land. They felt ocean swells with their bodies, interpreting subtle changes in wave direction that indicated the presence of islands hundreds of miles away. The Caroline Island navigators of Micronesia developed ETAC, a mental navigation system so sophisticated that researchers in the 20th century spent years trying to fully document and understand it. The system involved holding an imaginary fixed point in space while calculating the movement of islands relative to that point. It is a feat of spatial cognition that most people, trained to use GPS from childhood, can barely conceptualize. What makes this almost incomprehensible is the scale. These navigators crossed 10 million square kilometers of open ocean and found islands the size of airstrips. The error tolerance was 0. A wrong reading did not mean a detour. It meant death in every direction. They did not explore the Pacific. They mastered it. And they did it entirely inside their minds. Dukes number 1. Knowing when to walk away, every technique in this countdown, fire, water, shelter, food, navigation, tracking, medicine, is secondary to one skill. The skill that ancient humans developed before all the others. The skill that no tool replaces and no technology replicates. Knowing when the environment had changed too much to survive. And moving, the ability to read ecological warning signs, the departure of animal populations, the change in plant growth, the shift in seasonal patterns, the drying of water sources, an act on that reading before crisis arrived, was the foundational survival skill of the human species. The San people of the Kalahari, the Aboriginal Australians, the Arctic peoples of the far north, the cultures that survived the longest in the most extreme environments, did not do so by dominating their environments. They did so by reading them and moving with them. When the mammoths disappeared, humans moved. When the African humid period ended and the Sahara dried, a climate shift that happened between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago, turning a green, lake-filled landscape into the desert we know today. The populations living there did not fight the desert. They relocated to the Nile Valley, and some historians argue this migration directly contributed to the rise of Egyptian civilization. What makes this the most powerful survival technique in human history is what it demands. It demands humility. It demands the willingness to abandon everything familiar, land, shelter, graves, sacred places, and start again somewhere new. It demands reading reality clearly rather than hoping it will change. The civilizations that collapsed in history, the Maya, the Indus Valley settlements, the Bronze Age cultures, often collapsed not because they lacked technology or intelligence. They collapsed because they stayed too long. The ones who survived were the ones who read the signs and walked. That is the oldest survival lesson on Earth, and it is still